Well, for decades, the foreign policy issue with the biggest effect on your life, by far, and your children's lives, has been the permanent crisis on the American-Mexico border. But that's actually a misnomer. Thanks to decades of neglect, America's southern border isn't actually with Mexico anymore, or even with Latin America. No. Instead, it's become our border to the entire world. Here's one example. Since May 30th, more than 500 African migrants have been apprehended crossing the border in Texas at the Del Rio Border Patrol sector south of San Antonio. That's 500 from Africa in less than a month, just 2 weeks. Most of them came from Congo, Cameroon, and Angola. Some of them passed through more than half a dozen countries in order to get to the United States, traveling on foot all the way from Ecuador. Many of them already know where they want to settle. Of course, places like Portland, Maine, believe it or not, where friends and family have already settled before them, and where they know an accommodating government will provide them with the programs and benefits they desire. This is just the latest surge of what is now a flood of thousands of people, migrants from Africa and Asia making a very long trek illegally to enter the United States. Why the surge? Well, one reason is that Europe is finally cracking down on its own migrant crisis, but it's also simply a matter of word of mouth, which, by the way, is global. Millions of people worldwide know the truth. If you can show up at this country's border illegally and say the right words, you will likely get permission to enter the United States. Once you do that, it is unlikely you will ever be forced to leave. Virtually no one is ever forced to leave. So this is not a failure of tactics, it's a failure of political will. And it's one that will continue until leaders decide that America's borders actually matter and are worth defending. But don't look for that kind of change to come from the 2020 Democratic field. They don't believe it at all. For example, in an interview with Axios, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg says that really the endless flood of illegal immigrants into this country could, in fact, be a political ploy by President Trump. Watch.
Immigration is more useful to this president as a crisis, unsolved, than it would be as an achievement if he actually fixed it.
So you're saying the president is using the border crisis to get reelected?
The president needs this crisis to get worse, even though it makes a liar out of him. I don't think he's worried about that. He's worried about the ability to stir people up.
It worse.
I don't think he cares if it gets better, but he certainly doesn't benefit from comprehensively fixing the problem. And I wouldn't put it past him to allow it to become worse in order to have it be a more divisive issue so that he could benefit politically.
So really, it's Trump's fault that illegal aliens are streaming across the border from as far away as Africa. You know, almost every day, Democrats make accusations against their political opponents that, in fact, describe their own behavior. This is the most flagrant example yet. We could give you 1,000 examples, but this one is quite amazing. The border crisis isn't an invention of President Trump, obviously. He was elected in response to the border crisis. In fact, the crisis is a product of choices by our leaders in Washington, choices they've made over and over and over for decades. Republicans have made it to placate their wealthy donors. Democrats have made it because they decided a new pool of voters is better than appealing to the existing pool of voters, for whom they no longer care. Their plan is working. Just look at California right now, and look at what Texas and Arizona are swiftly becoming. There's no rush to fix things. For the left, including Mayor Buttigieg, thousands of African migrants, that's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of success. Andrew Arthur is a former immigration judge and resident fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. He joins us tonight. Mr. Arthur, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
Just to take out of circulation Mayor Buttigieg's accusation right off the top, he's claiming that the president, for all his faults, is pushing for more illegal aliens to come into this country. Does that seem likely to you?
That's completely contrary to everything that the Trump administration has done in recent weeks. The president threatened a 5% tariff going up to 25% against Mexico in order to get Mexico to actually defend its southern border. And we're seeing unprecedented cooperation out of a government that, quite frankly, is hostile to any idea of stopping migration through Mexico to the United States. The president has actually made the president of Mexico, Lopez Obrador, step down his rhetoric and put troops on the border to actually stop those individuals. We see in the Guatemalan government begging for American help and actually accepting CBP officers to come and help them defend their borders. The president is asking other countries to do what Congress should be doing, but Congress is not acting because the Democrats in Congress don't want to. Mr. Buttigieg is just simply deflecting the responsibility from the Democratic Party to the president.
But I mean, even by the standards of the Democratic field, that's a lie that's so ambitious, it kind of, I don't know, you've got to kind of stand back in awe and respect to say something that absurd. But when African migrants are coming across the border from Mexico by the hundreds just in the past couple of weeks, is there a clearer sign you've seen that the system really is collapsing?
That is probably the clearest sign that the system is collapsing, because those individuals are paying tens of thousands of dollars because they know that they are going to get into the United States and they're going to be able to remain here permanently once they get here. And the trip, which many of them make, goes through Ecuador, Colombia, up through Central America. Each one of these countries is an asylum-granting country. If they were actually in fear of their lives, they would apply for asylum in any of those countries, but they're not, because their ultimate goal is to come to the United States and live and work here permanently. And this is something that I saw when I was an immigration judge with Somalis. It's just simply become a new group of nationals from Central Africa now who have heard about how open the American borders are and who want to come and exploit them.
The population growth in that part of the world, particularly on the continent of Africa, suggests that, I mean, this flood could become a torrent. No?
Absolutely. And there's, you know, without the support of our southern neighbors, in the absence of support from the United States Congress, we truly would just be overwhelmed with individuals, you know, from poor countries who have literally sold everything that they had to make the journey to the United States. In fact, I think the New York Times reported one woman said she didn't have $1 to her name by the time that she arrived in the United States. Yeah. But they do it because they know that they're going to come here. And, you know, when looking at a U.S. wage every day, it's a smart economic decision to make. Till Congress acts, it's just going to continue.
Right. I would do the same. I don't judge them. I judge our leaders. It's going to overwhelm our country and change it completely and forever. And our viewers should know that. Andrew, thanks very much for coming on.